The frozen hell of Karelia. The Finnish winter of 1939 was merciless, even by Nordic standards. Temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Celsius, turning the forests of Karelia into a crystalline nightmare where breath froze in midair and metal burned bare skin on contact. In this frozen hell, Simo Haiha crouched behind a snow-covered embankment, his white camouflage making him invisible against the endless expanse of white. The Red Army had invaded Finland with overwhelming force. 500,000 men, thousands of tanks, and hundreds of aircraft. The odds were impossible. Finland had barely 300,000 soldiers and outdated equipment. But what the Finns lacked in numbers, they made up for an intimate knowledge of their terrain and an unshakable determination to defend their homeland. Simo was 24 years old, a farmer from the small municipality of Rajärvi. He stood just over 5 feet tall, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes that could spot movement in the forest that others would miss entirely. Before the war, he had been known locally as an exceptional hunter and competitive marksman. Now, those skills would be tested in ways he had never imagined. His rifle was a Finnish-made Mosin-Nagant M/28-30, a bolt-action weapon that most soldiers considered adequate but unremarkable. What set Simo apart wasn't his weapon, it was his method. While other snipers used telescopic sights to acquire targets at long range, Simo relied solely on iron sights. His fellow soldiers thought he was mad. His commanders questioned his judgment. The conventional wisdom was clear. Scopes were superior in every way. But Simo knew something the textbooks didn't teach. He had spent countless hours in the Finnish wilderness, hunting in conditions that would have killed most men. He understood that in the brutal cold of a Finnish winter, a scope was a liability. The glass would fog from breath. The lens would catch and reflect sunlight, giving away a sniper's position. The scope added height to the rifle, forcing a sniper to expose more of his head above cover. These weren't theoretical concerns. They were the difference between life and death. On this particular morning, Simo had been in position for 3 hours. He had packed snow around himself, becoming part of the landscape. His breathing was slow and controlled, each exhale carefully directed away from his rifle. He had learned to keep snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from creating telltale vapor clouds. His trigger finger, despite the cold, remained sensitive and precise. Through his iron sights, he watched a Soviet position 400 meters away. Red Army soldiers moved with the casual confidence of men who believed their superior numbers made them invincible. They smoked cigarettes. They talked loudly. They had been told the war would be over in weeks, that the Finns would collapse under the weight of Soviet might. Simo had already killed 4 men that morning. Each shot had been carefully calculated, each target selected based on value and opportunity. He aimed for officers first, then machine gunners, then anyone who seemed to be organizing the others. But what amazed his spotter, a young soldier named Marty who lay beside him, wasn't just the accuracy. It was the speed. While a German sniper using a scope would take 30 to 40 seconds between shots, Simo fired again within 12 seconds. His bolt action was fluid, almost musical. Chamber, aim, breathe, squeeze. Chamber, aim, breathe, squeeze. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. The iron sights aligned instantly, his muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought was almost unnecessary. "How would you do it?" Marty whispered, his voice barely audible. "The Germans take forever between shots. You're like a machine." Simo didn't answer immediately. He was tracking another target, a Soviet officer who had just emerged from a dugout. The man was holding a map, pointing and giving orders. A commander. High value. The crosshairs of Simo's iron sights settled on the man's chest. Breath out. Hold. Squeeze. The rifle cracked. The officer crumpled. 11 seconds later, Simo fired again, dropping the soldier who had been standing next to the officer. The Soviet position erupted in chaos, men diving for cover, unsure where the shots were coming from. "No scope to adjust," Simo finally replied, working his bolt smoothly. "No fog to clear. No reflection to give me away. Just muscle memory and iron. That's the secret. Everyone thinks I'm suicidal for not using a scope. But I'm still alive, and they're not. As the sun climbed higher in the frozen sky, Simo settled in for another long day of hunting. The war was just beginning, and he had a feeling his suicidal method was going to prove them all wrong. The White Death emerges. Word of the mysterious Finnish sniper spread through Soviet ranks like a plague. Men who had laughed at Finnish resistance now whispered fearfully about an invisible killer who struck without warning. They called him the White Death, Belyausmrt in Russian. Soldiers refused to volunteer for patrol duty. Officers stopped emerging from their bunkers during daylight hours. The psychological impact was devastating. Colonel Ivan Volkov stood in the command dugout, staring at casualty reports that made no sense. In just 2 weeks, his regiment had lost 43 men to sniper fire in a sector that should have been quiet. Not 43 casualties, 43 dead. Each shot a kill. The precision was inhuman. "Sir, we've identified the shooter," his intelligence officer reported, laying out a series of reconnaissance photos. Finnish locals say it's a farmer named Simo Haiha, used to win shooting competitions before the war. Works alone or with a single spotter. The men are terrified of him. Volkov studied the blurry images. A small man in white camouflage, barely visible against the snow. Nothing remarkable about him. Nothing that explained how one man could create such carnage. What weapons is he using? Standard Mosin-Nagant rifle, sir. No scope. Iron sights only. Volkov looked up sharply. No scope? That's impossible. Our snipers are trained to engage at 600 meters with scoped rifles. How is he achieving these results with iron sights? We don't know, sir. But witnesses say he fires much faster than our snipers. 3, sometimes 4 shots before our men can find cover. It's like he doesn't need to aim. The colonel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Deploy our best counter-sniper teams. German advisors, too. I want this man dead by week's end. Meanwhile, in the frozen forests, Simo was teaching his method to other Finnish soldiers. The high command had taken notice of his success and wanted to replicate it. A dozen snipers gathered in a snow-covered clearing, their breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. The scope makes you slow, Simo explained, holding up his rifle. Every time you shift position, you have to reacquire through the glass. Your eye has to adjust. In the seconds you waste, the enemy finds cover or finds you. With iron sights, your instincts take over. You see, you aim, you fire. One motion. A tall sniper named Pekka raised his hand. But the accuracy, surely a scope is more accurate at long range? Simo smiled thinly. Accuracy means nothing if you're dead. A scope catches light. It fogs in the cold. It adds 5 centimeters to your profile. That's 5 centimeters of your head exposed above cover. 5 centimeters that catch a bullet. He paused, letting that sink in. I'll take iron sights and speed over scope and death any day. He demonstrated his technique, the rifle moving like an extension of his body. Acquire target, breathe out, squeeze. Work the bolt. Acquire next target, breathe out, squeeze. 11 seconds between shots. The watching soldiers were stunned. The Germans trained their snipers to fire once every 30 to 40 seconds, Simo continued. They're good, very good. But in 30 seconds, I've killed 3 men. That's not bravery. That's mathematics. Over the next several days, Simo put his suicidal method to the test against the Soviet counter-sniper teams. These weren't conscripts or regular soldiers. These were specialists, trained by German advisors, equipped with the finest scoped rifles the Red Army could provide. The Soviets were confident these professionals would end the White Death's reign. The first team consisted of 3 snipers who took position in a dense copse of trees overlooking Simo's known operating area. They had Mosin-Nagant rifles equipped with PE and PM scopes, precision instruments that German experts swore were superior to anything the Finns possessed. They waited patiently, scanning the snowfields through their magnified optics. Simo spotted them within an hour. The sun reflecting off one of their scopes gave them away. Exactly the weakness he had predicted. He was positioned 300 meters away, concealed in a snowdrift he'd carefully constructed the night before. His white camouflage was perfect. His rifle barrel was wrapped in white cloth. Even his face was covered except for his eyes. Through his iron sights, he could see the glint of their scopes. They were looking in roughly his direction, but couldn't pinpoint him. He took his time, identifying which sniper appeared to be the team leader based on hand signals. That man would die first. The shot echoed across the frozen landscape. The Soviet team leader's scope shattered, the bullet passing through the glass and into his eye. Before the other two snipers could react, Simo had worked his bolt and fired again. The second man went down. The third Soviet sniper, panicking, raised his head too high, trying to locate the source of the shots. Simo's third bullet found him 12 seconds after the first. 3 German-trained counter-snipers dead in less than 30 seconds. All killed by a farmer with iron sights who everyone said was using a suicidal method. The message to Soviet command was clear. The White Death couldn't be stopped by conventional means. The hunt intensifies. Lieutenant Hans Müller of the Wehrmacht's Sniper Training Corps arrived at the Soviet command post with a reputation that preceded him. A veteran of the Spanish Civil War and the Polish campaign, he had personally eliminated over 60 enemy combatants and trained hundreds of snipers in the German military's methodical approach to precision shooting. Colonel Volkov welcomed him with desperate relief. "Thank you for coming, Lieutenant," Volkov said, pouring vodka into 2 glasses despite the early hour. "This Finnish sniper is destroying morale. My men are afraid to leave their bunkers." Mueller accepted the drink, but didn't smile. "I've read your reports. This Haiha interests me. No scope, high speed, exceptional accuracy. It contradicts everything we teach, yet the results speak for themselves." He set down his glass. "I want to observe him before I kill him." "Observe him? Lieutenant, every day he lives, more of my men die." "Colonel, I'm not here just to eliminate one sniper. I'm here to understand his method so we can counter it across the entire front." Mueller pulled out a tactical map. "Show me where he operates." Over the next 3 days, Mueller studied Simo's patterns with the patience of a chess grandmaster. He noted the kill zones, the timing of attacks, the selection of targets. What he saw both impressed and troubled him. Simo didn't operate like a traditional sniper. There was no single hide site, no predictable routine. The Finnish sniper moved constantly, rarely taking more than 5 or 6 shots from one position before relocating. "He's not hunting for numbers," Mueller explained to Volkov. "He's hunting for effect. Every shot serves a purpose, killing officers, destroying morale, creating chaos. And this speed, it's remarkable." Mueller decided to test Simo personally. He selected a position overlooking one of the Finnish snipers' probable approach routes and waited. Unlike the Soviet counter-snipers, Mueller knew not to let his scope catch the light. He kept his lens shrouded until the moment he needed to aim. His rifle was a Carabiner 98K with a Zeiss scope, the finest precision instrument Germany could produce. For 6 hours, he remained motionless. The cold was brutal, but Mueller had trained in conditions almost as harsh. His discipline was absolute. Just before noon, he caught movement, barely perceptible, 400 meters to his left. A white shape shifted against white snow. Most observers would have missed it entirely. Mueller slowly, infinitely slowly, brought his rifle to bear. Through his scope, he could make out the outline of a prone figure. Was it Haiha? Impossible to tell. But the position was perfect for observing Soviet lines, and the camouflage was expert level. He centered his crosshairs on where the target's head should be and prepared to squeeze the trigger. Then he saw something that made him pause. A tiny glint of sunlight reflecting off iron sights as the target adjusted aim. No scope. This had to be the White Death. Mueller's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, the Finnish sniper moved, not retreating, but shifting laterally with impossible speed. Mueller tracked him through the scope, but by the time he reacquired the target, Simo had fired 3 times at Soviet positions and was relocating again. The entire sequence took less than 40 seconds. Mueller didn't fire. He couldn't. The target was moving too unpredictably, and the moment he revealed his position with a shot, he would become the hunted. For the first time in his career, the German sniper felt a cold respect for an enemy. This wasn't luck or recklessness. This was a completely different philosophy of sniping. That evening, Mueller reported to Volkov with unusual candor. "Colonel, I can kill him, but it will take time. He moves like a ghost and fires like a machine. His method shouldn't work according to every principle I know, but it does work. The iron sights give him speed. The lack of scope eliminates weaknesses, and that speed allows him to engage multiple targets before we can respond." "So what do we do?" Volkov asked, frustration evident in his voice. "We don't play his game. We bring artillery. We bring mortars. We saturate his operating areas with fire. You can't outsnipe him, but you can make the forest too dangerous for anyone to hide in." Volkov approved the plan immediately. Within days, Soviet artillery began pounding the forests where Simo operated. Tree bursts sent shrapnel screaming through the woods. Mortar rounds crept through potential hide sites. The psychological warfare went both ways now. If the Soviets couldn't see the White Death, they would simply destroy everything. But Simo adapted. He moved operations deeper into Finnish territory, selecting positions that were harder to shell. He varied his schedule, sometimes remaining silent for days before striking again. He taught his techniques to more Finnish snipers, multiplying the threat. The Soviets were no longer hunting one man. They were fighting an entire network of ghosts who fired faster than seemed humanly possible. In the Soviet command, Mueller studied the problem with growing concern. Reports indicated that Finnish sniper effectiveness had tripled since Haiha began training others. The suicidal method was spreading. German high command wanted answers. Why were Soviet and German-scoped snipers being consistently outperformed by Finns using primitive iron sights? Mueller wrote a detailed report that challenged decades of sniper doctrine. He explained how the Finnish winter environment negated many advantages of scoped rifles. He described how Haiha's method prioritized speed and concealment over raw accuracy at extreme range. He concluded with an uncomfortable truth. In certain conditions, the old ways might be better than the new. The report was not well received. German military theorists dismissed it as defeatist. Soviet commanders called it excuse-making. But on the front lines, soldiers knew the truth. The White Death and his disciples were rewriting the rules of sniper warfare, one impossibly fast shot at a time. As January turned to February, Simo's kill count climbed toward 200. He had become more than a soldier. He was a legend, a symbol of Finnish resistance. Soviet troops began carrying amulets and charms for protection against him. Some units refused to operate in sectors where he was known to be active. And through it all, Simo remained the same quiet farmer he had always been. He didn't boast about his kills or seek glory. Each morning, he packed snow in his mouth, chambered his first round, and went to work with the same methodical focus he had once applied to tending his farm. The rifle was simply another tool, the forest simply another field to harvest. But the Soviets were learning. Artillery strikes became more precise. Counter-sniper teams adopted new tactics, working in larger groups and using bait-and-ambush strategies. The hunt for the White Death intensified to unprecedented levels. Moscow wanted him dead. Stalin himself had reportedly been briefed on this single Finnish sniper who had become such a propaganda problem. The question was no longer if they would find him, but when. And what would happen when the unstoppable force of Soviet determination met the immovable object of Simo Haiha's iron will? The cost of speed. February 1940 brought a subtle shift in the war's character. The Soviet offensive, which was supposed to have crushed Finland in weeks, had ground into a brutal stalemate. The Red Army had suffered staggering casualties, over 126,000 dead, with hundreds of thousands more wounded or suffering from frostbite. Finnish casualties were severe too, but proportionally far lighter. The tiny nation had proven that courage and skill could offset numerical superiority. Simo Haiha's personal toll on the Soviet army had reached mythical proportions. His confirmed kill count exceeded 250, though the actual number was likely higher. He had become Finland's greatest weapon not just through his marksmanship, but through the terror he inspired. Entire Soviet companies delayed advances because of reports that the White Death was operating in their sector. But success came at a cost that few understood. Simo's spotter, Marty, watched with growing concern as his friend pushed himself beyond normal human limits. Simo would remain in position for 12, sometimes 16 hours at a stretch, barely moving, barely breathing. The cold that would kill most men in hours merely numbed Simo's already iron constitution. He ate little, slept less, and spoke even less than that. "You need rest," Marty said one evening as they trudged back to finish lines through the darkness. "You're going to collapse." Simo shook his head. "Every day I rest, Soviet soldiers advance. Every day I'm in the field, they hesitate. I'll rest when the war is over. You'll be dead when the war is over if you keep this pace." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Simo didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. He knew Marty was right. The speed that made his method so effective also demanded perfect physical condition and absolute focus. One moment of weakness, one trembling hand, one delayed reaction, and he would be the one in the crosshairs. The Soviet command had indeed learned from their failures. They developed a new tactic specifically designed to counter Simo's speed advantage. Instead of sending individual counter-sniper teams, they deployed entire platoons with orders to saturate suspected sniper positions with coordinated fire. They didn't need to spot him precisely, they just needed to put enough bullets in the air that speed and camouflage became irrelevant. Simo first encountered this new tactic on February 17th. He had taken position in his favorite spot overlooking a Soviet supply route, a small ridge that offered excellent visibility and multiple escape routes. He had killed 2 officers and a machine gunner in quick succession, 11 seconds between shots, as always, when the forest erupted. Dozens of rifles opened fire simultaneously. Bullets tore through the air around him, kicking up snow, splintering wood, sending shrapnel from rock impacts whistling past his head. This wasn't aimed fire. This was overwhelming volume, designed to make his position untenable. Simo rolled backward, scrambling for cover as rounds stitched the ground where he had been lying. Marty, positioned 20 meters away, provided covering fire as Simo retreated. They had practiced this drill countless times, but never under such intense pressure. As they withdrew through the forest, Soviet infantry advanced, firing continuously. It was a hunter's tactic: drive the prey, don't let it rest, keep it moving until it makes a mistake. They escaped, but barely. That night, in the relative safety of finished defensive positions, Simo examined his rifle. A bullet had struck the stock, leaving a deep gouge but not damaging the action. 5 centimeters higher, and it would have hit his shoulder. 10 centimeters higher, and it would have hit his head. "They're adapting," he said quietly, running his fingers over the damage. "Not trying to outshoot me, trying to overwhelm me." Captain Annie Ranelagh, Simo's commanding officer, joined them at the fire. He was a career soldier who had fought in the Finnish Civil War and understood both the value and the limits of exceptional individuals in warfare. "Simo, you've done more than anyone could have asked. You've killed hundreds and terrorized thousands. But the Soviets have unlimited men and ammunition. Eventually, their tactics will work. Are you ordering me to stop?" Simo asked, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp. "I'm ordering you to be smart. Choose your engagements. Train more snipers to use your method. Multiply yourself instead of burning yourself out." Ranelagh paused, choosing his words carefully. The war isn't going to be won or lost by one sniper, no matter how fast he shoots. But if you die, the morale impact on our troops will be devastating. You're worth more alive than dead. Simo considered this. His entire method was built on aggression and speed, on attacking before the enemy could react. Being cautious felt like betraying the principles that had made him effective. But he also recognized the truth in Ranelagh's words. The Soviets were learning. The easy kills were gone. Every shot now carried greater risk. Over the next week, Simo shifted his approach. He spent more time training other snipers, passing on not just the technical aspects of his method, but the mindset behind it. Speed wasn't just about how fast you worked the bolt, It was about reading terrain, predicting enemy movement, understanding when to shoot and when to wait. A dozen Finnish snipers became proficient in his techniques. 2 dozen more showed promise. The multiplication strategy worked. Soviet commanders began receiving reports of rapid-fire sniper attacks across multiple sectors simultaneously. They couldn't all be Haiha. The psychological impact intensified. The White Death was everywhere and nowhere, an invisible army of ghosts that struck without warning and vanished before counterfire could be organized. But Simo couldn't stay away from the front. Teaching was valuable, but it wasn't him. On March 2nd, despite Rantala's protests, he returned to the forest with Marty. Intelligence reports indicated that a Soviet general would be inspecting forward positions. High-value target. Worth the risk. They established position before dawn, in a location Simo had never used before. The Soviets had started watching his favorite spots with artillery pre-registered on the coordinates. The new position was less comfortable, offered fewer escape routes, but had perfect sight lines to where the general would pass. Hours passed. The cold gnawed at them. Simo kept snow in his mouth, controlled his breathing, remained perfectly still. His iron sights pointed steadily at the gap in the Soviet lines where vehicles would pass. Marty scanned for threats through binoculars, watching for the counter-sniper teams that were always lurking. At 1,100 hours, the convoy appeared. 3 trucks, 2 staff cars, and an escort of infantry. Through his iron sights, Simo could see the general in the second car. High collar, medals, the unmistakable bearing of senior rank. Range, 380 meters. Wind, negligible. Temperature, -38°C, which affected ballistics, but not beyond his ability to compensate. Simo exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. Through the sight picture, he saw the general slump. He worked the bolt, smooth, fluid, faster than thought, and fired again, hitting the driver of the same car. The vehicle swerved and stopped. Third shot, the officer who jumped out to help. 33 seconds, 3 kills, mission accomplished. Then the world exploded. The Soviets had anticipated this. They had used the general, a real general, not a decoy, because anything less wouldn't have drawn Haiha as bait. The moment Simo fired, pre-registered artillery opened up. Mortars bracketed the ridge. Machine guns swept the area. The carefully planned ambush was sprung. Simo and Marty ran. They had planned escape routes, but the Soviets had planned for that too. Infantry units were already moving to cut them off. This wasn't the desperate, disorganized response of earlier weeks. This was precise, professional, and overwhelming. The hunters had become the hunted, and the trap was closing. The price of legend. The forest exploded around them as Simo and Marty sprinted through the trees. Artillery shells sent geysers of snow and dirt skyward. The concussive blasts knocked them down repeatedly, but training and desperation kept them moving. Machine gun fire chased them, tracer rounds drawing glowing lines through the gray morning light. "Left! Go left!" Marty shouted, pointing toward a dense thicket. They veered, bullets clipping branches inches from their heads. Behind them, Soviet infantry were advancing in organized waves, working in teams to cut off escape routes. This wasn't a random response. It was a choreographed hunt. Simo's mind raced, even as his legs pumped. The Soviets had learned his methods, studied his patterns, and set the perfect trap. They had sacrificed a real general as bait, knowing that only a target of that value would draw him out. It was brilliant, ruthless, and terrifyingly effective. For the first time since the war began, Simo felt genuine fear. They reached a small ravine and threw themselves into it, just as another mortar barrage walked across their previous position. The blast wave washed over them, sucking the air from their lungs. Ears ringing, they scrambled along the depression, using what little cover it provided. "We need to split up," Simo gasped. "You go south, toward our lines. I'll lead them north, draw them away." "No," Marty said firmly. "We stay together. I'm not leaving you." "That's an order, soldier." "You're not my commander, Simo. You're my friend. We leave together or we die together." There was no time to argue. Soviet infantry were closing in from multiple directions. Simo could hear their officers shouting orders in Russian, coordinating the encirclement. He and Marty moved along the ravine, heading roughly northeast, away from both Soviet and Finnish lines, but toward rougher terrain where larger formations would have difficulty following. For 2 hours they evaded their pursuers, using every trick Simo had learned in years of hunting. They masked their tracks, doubled back, moved through streams to break their trail. But the Soviets maintained pressure, using artillery to flush them from cover whenever they tried to hide. This was a war of attrition now, and the Red Army had numbers on their side. By early afternoon, they had outdistanced the immediate pursuit but were dangerously far from Finnish positions. They took shelter in a small cave, barely more than an indentation in a rocky hillside, to catch their breath and assess the situation. "They're going to keep hunting," Marty said, checking his ammunition. He had 3 magazines left. "They know it's you. They won't give up." Simo nodded. His own ammunition situation was better. 8 rounds in the rifle, 40 more in his pouches, but ammunition didn't matter if they were too exhausted to shoot straight. His hands were trembling slightly from fatigue and cold. That trembling would throw off his aim, negate the speed advantage that kept him alive. "We wait until dark," Simo decided. "Then we move back to our lines." 3 hours. Those 3 hours felt like 3 days. They could hear Soviet search parties moving through the forest, methodically clearing sectors. Twice, soldiers passed within 20 meters of their hiding spot. Simo kept his rifle ready, finger on the trigger, prepared to sell their lives dearly if discovered. But luck and good camouflage held. The Soviets passed without detecting them. As twilight descended, they prepared to move. Simo studied the terrain, planning their route. They would have to cross at least 2 kilometers of contested ground to reach Finnish lines. In daylight, impossible. In darkness, merely extremely dangerous. They waited until full dark, then began their infiltration. Moving slowly, pausing frequently to listen, they crossed through the Soviet rear areas. They passed supply dumps, artillery positions, even a field hospital. The Red Army was so confident in their encirclement that their rear security was lax. Simo filed away these observations. If he survived, the intelligence would be valuable. They were 200 meters from Finnish positions when disaster struck. A Soviet patrol, returning from the front, encountered them in the darkness. For a frozen moment, both groups stared at each other, trying to identify friend from foe in the dim moonlight. A Soviet soldier raised his rifle. Simo was faster. His first shot dropped the soldier. Second shot, another Soviet down. Third shot, the bolt jammed. Snow and dirt from their desperate escape had fouled the action. The rifle that had killed hundreds locked up at the worst possible moment. Marty opened fire with his submachine gun, cutting down 2 more Soviets. But return fire found him, bullets tearing through his chest. He went down hard, his weapon falling silent. Simo threw aside his jammed rifle and drew his pistol, a Finnish Lottie L, 35, and fired the remaining 3 rounds at point-blank range. The last Soviet soldier fell. Silence. Simo crawled to Marty. Even in the darkness, he could see the dark stains spreading across his friend's white camouflage. Marty's breathing was shallow, labored. A sucking chest wound. Fatal without immediate medical attention. "Leave me," Marty whispered. "Get to our lines. You're more important." "No." Simo holstered his pistol and lifted Marty in a fireman's carry. His friend wasn't large, but the added weight was brutal after hours of running and fighting. He staggered toward Finnish positions, every step agony. Finnish sentries heard the commotion and opened fire. "Friendly! Friendly!" Simo shouted in Finnish. "Hi-ha! Don't shoot!" The firing stopped. Hands reached out from the darkness, taking Marty's weight, pulling them both into the trench system. Medics rushed Marty to the aid station. Simo collapsed against the trench wall, every muscle screaming. Captain Rantala appeared, his face grave. "The Soviets are going to counterattack. They followed you. We're about to be hit hard." Simo looked at his jammed rifle, then at the Finnish soldiers preparing for the assault. Young men, terrified but determined. They looked at him with something approaching reverence. The White Death had returned. Surely that meant they would survive. "Give me a clean rifle," Simo said, forcing himself upright. His body was broken, his hands still trembling, his mind fogged with exhaustion. But finish lines were about to be tested, and these men needed him. "I'm not done yet." Rantala handed him a fresh Mosin Nagant. "You should rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead." Simo checked the action, chambered around, and took position in the trench. Through his iron sights, he could see Soviet infantry massing in the tree line, preparing to attack. They were coming for him, and he would give them exactly what they wanted. One more time, one more battle. The speed that defined his method demanded perfect physical condition. But tonight, discipline and willpower would have to substitute for what his body could no longer provide. The iron sights aligned. His breathing steadied. His hands stopped shaking through sheer force of will. Behind him, Finnish soldiers took positions, drawing courage from his presence. The Soviets attacked at midnight, and the White Death, though exhausted and battered, proved once again why legends are not easily killed. The final shot. The Soviet assault came in waves, each more desperate than the last. They had tracked the White Death to this position and were determined to finish him regardless of cost. Artillery pounded Finnish lines, machine guns swept the trenches, and infantry charged through the snow with reckless courage born of revenge and frustration. Simo fought with the mechanical precision of a machine. Acquire target, breathe, fire. Work the bolt. Acquire target, breathe, fire. Each shot landed despite his exhaustion, despite the chaos, despite everything. Officers fell first as always. Machine gunner second, then anyone who rallied the others. The same calculus he had used for months, executed with the same impossible speed. But something was different tonight. The trembling in his hands was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. Time seemed to slow. Each target appeared in his sights, as if drawn there by destiny. Simo had entered what combat soldiers throughout history have called the zone, that transcendent state where conscious thought falls away and the warrior becomes pure instrument. Beside him, Finnish soldiers fought with renewed vigor. The White Death was with them. How could they fail? They fired with abandon, throwing back assault after assault. Soviet casualties mounted, but the Red Army kept coming. This wasn't about military objectives anymore. This was personal. At 0200 hours, Marty died in the aid station. The medics did everything they could, but the chest wounds were too severe. His last words were asking if Simo had made it to safety. When told his friend survived, Marty smiled and closed his eyes. Simo didn't learn of his friend's death until later. In the heat of battle, there was no time for grief. He continued firing, continued working that bolt action with hypnotic rhythm. His ammunition pouches emptied and were refilled by soldiers who pressed bullets into his hands like offerings to a deity. His rifle barrel grew hot despite the freezing temperature. Still he fired. Dawn broke on March 6th, revealing a wasteland. Soviet dead lay in heaps before the Finnish positions. The snow was stained red in patches as large as lakes. The assault had failed, broken against Finnish resistance and one sniper's impossible accuracy. As light spread across the battlefield, the Soviets pulled back, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. Simo lowered his rifle. His hands were finally shaking again, the adrenaline fading. He had fired over 150 rounds during the night's fighting, each shot a kill or near kill. The rifle that should have taken 40 seconds per shot had been worked down to 12, even in his exhausted state. Speed and iron sights had prevailed once more. But the victory felt hollow. A runner brought news of Marty's death. Simo received it silently, his expression unchanging, but something inside him cracked. All those kills, all that speed, all that deadly efficiency, and he couldn't save his friend. The man who had watched his back, who had believed in him, who had refused to leave him behind. Gone. Captain Rantala found him an hour later, sitting alone in the trench, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Simo, you need medical attention. And sleep. Real sleep. Where's Marty? Simo asked, though he knew the answer. He died like a soldier, saving his country and his friend. Rantalis sat beside him. He was proud of you. Told the medics you were going to win this war single-handedly. One man doesn't win wars. No, but one man can give others hope that wars can be won. That's what you've done. Every soldier in the Finnish army knows your name now. Every Soviet soldier fears it. You've proven that courage and skill can defeat numerical superiority. That matters, Simo. That matters more than you know. Simo nodded slowly. He understood the tactical reality. Finland was still losing. The Soviet Union had begun a massive offensive that would eventually force peace terms. All his kills, all his speed, all his impossible shooting couldn't change the strategic balance. But perhaps Ranelagh was right. Perhaps the legend mattered more than the statistics. For the next 3 days, Simo remained in the trenches, sniping when targets appeared, but mostly training others. He taught them his method with new urgency, knowing his time was limited. Every Finnish sniper who could achieve even half his speed would multiply his impact exponentially. The technique was spreading throughout the army now. The suicidal method that everyone had mocked was becoming standard doctrine. On March 9th, Simo was in his firing position when the world exploded. A Soviet sniper, probably one of the German-trained specialists, or possibly an explosive round from a rifle grenade, caught him in the face. The impact shattered his jaw, removed his left cheek, and knocked him unconscious. His fellow soldiers thought he was dead. The entry in the casualty report read, Simo Haiha, killed in action. But legends don't die easily. Simo survived barely. He was evacuated through a series of medical stations, eventually reaching a hospital in the rear. The injuries were catastrophic. His face would need extensive reconstruction. He remained unconscious for days. When he finally woke, the war was over. Finland had signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union on March 13, 1940. The peace was harsh. Finland lost territory and paid heavy reparations. But Finland survived as an independent nation. That ultimately was the victory. A small country had faced the Soviet juggernaut and forced it to negotiate rather than simply occupying Finnish territory. The cost was terrible. 25,000 Finnish dead, 43,000 wounded. But Soviet casualties were 5 times higher. The Red Army had learned respect for Finnish determination. As Simo recovered in the hospital, his face wrapped in bandages, visitors came. Generals, politicians, fellow soldiers. They told him his final kill count, 542 confirmed. Over 200 more probable, all in under 100 days. The most lethal sniper in history. All achieved with a rifle everyone said was obsolete, using a method everyone said was suicidal. Lieutenant Hans Müller, a German sniper, even sent a letter. It was professional, almost admiring. You proved me wrong. Speed and simplicity defeated precision and technology. I have recommended that German sniper training incorporate elements of your method. If we ever meet again, it will not be over rifle sights. You have earned that much respect. Simo's response, when he could finally speak again through his reconstructed jaw, was characteristically brief. I only did what was necessary. But the truth was more complex. Simo's method had revolutionized sniper warfare. Military tacticians worldwide studied his techniques. The German Wehrmacht, the Soviet NKVD, the British Commandos, all incorporated lessons from the White Death's impossible speed. The age-old debate between scoped accuracy and iron sight speed was forever changed. Context mattered. Environment mattered. The best tool depended on the situation. Years later, long after the war, Simo Haiha lived quietly on a farm, the very same land he had once left to defend. He rarely spoke of the war. When pressed about his incredible kill count and revolutionary methods, he would simply say, I did what I was told to do. No scope needed, just good eyes, steady hands, and respect for the enemy. But on winter mornings, when the snow fell thick and the forest turned white, he would sometimes take out an old Mosin-Nagant rifle and practice his technique. The bolt worked with the same fluid speed. The iron sights aligned with the same impossible precision. Age couldn't take that from him. The muscle memory was too deep, forged in the frozen hell of the Winter War. He lived to be 96 years old, dying peacefully in 2002. By then, his legend had spread far beyond Finland's borders. Every military sniper in the world knew the name Simo Häyhä. They knew about his iron sights. They knew about his speed. They knew about the suicidal method that killed 542 Soviet soldiers in less than 100 days. And in sniper schools from Fort Benning to Quantico, from Bridge to Tambov, instructors tell his story. They teach the importance of adapting to environment. They emphasize that speed can defeat precision. They explain that sometimes the old ways are better than the new. But most importantly, they teach that legends aren't born from perfect equipment or orthodox methods. Legends are born when ordinary men do extraordinary things with whatever tools they have. When farmers become ghosts. When iron sights become instruments of legend. When the suicidal method becomes the key to survival. Simo Häyhä proved that in warfare, as in life, success comes not from following the rules everyone else follows, but from understanding which rules matter and which rules can be broken. He fired 3 times faster than German snipers, not despite his primitive equipment, but because of it. He survived not despite his suicidal method, but because of it. The White Death taught the world a lesson written in snow and blood. Sometimes the fastest gun wins. And sometimes the simplest sight sees furthest.